So I wanted to share this project that I'm working on with you guys here on YouTube. This is a visualization of some of the Pennsylvania election data. So I went into this project just because it's very hard to get a hold of election data, and I actually had to do what's called data scraping to get a lot of this, as did some of the people that I got the data from for other dates of this, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But it's very hard to actually find this data and actually discuss what's going on, and this is like a really hot topic right now. This is definitely something that everyone's trying to understand. So what I did was I got all this data and I collected it and built some visualizations out of it. And my goal is not to support any theory or political party or provide really any opinion on the data. I just wanted to pull the data from the pa.gov websites, or show you where I got the data from other people who also pulled it from the pa.gov websites, where they displayed their election results. And what I'm actually going to show you is I'm going to explain how this dashboard is all laid out, how all the visualizations were made. And I'm going to show you a few of the points that are kind of gathered in there. It's really interesting because we have snapshots of election result data from November 3rd, election day. We have snapshots of November 7th, which was the Saturday after the election. And then we also have November 22nd, which was yesterday, when I got the data from the pa.gov website and then brought it into this data set and visualized it. So when I was looking through data, I was looking at what interesting pieces I could find to display certain things that maybe people weren't talking about. And so that's why I named this overall dashboard. It's called the Pennsylvania 2020 Change from Political Party Data Visualization, but I kind of went much further than that. But the main page right here that we're looking at right now, what I did was I found this sheet, and what it had on it was the change in party affiliation. So these are voters that left one party or the other. So if you went in and you said, hey, I'm changing from Democrat to Republican, or from Republican to Democrat party, it shows who left. It doesn't show where they went. It doesn't show what party they actually gained or joined, but it shows what party they left. And what I did with this is to try, I pulled this data in an attempt to show the mood, if you will, in Pennsylvania of like what people are feeling. Because when people go in and change their political affiliation, that may indicate that there's a clear leaning one way or the other, and it could kind of maybe help us understand what the mood or the temperature is in any given area. And that's my opinion and my interpretation of it. But what I wanted to do is just explain this first page here. So I kept the visualization really simple, and I kept a total sum of everything. But you can see right down here, you can actually scroll through each county, and I have this sorted by highest change at the top, and that's for each party. So you can see the parties that had the highest change. You can actually see Lancaster County in Pennsylvania had a high change away from party for Democrats and Republicans, and you can see Delaware County was also up there too. But there's a couple of other pieces of data that are really interesting to compare this against, like total registered voter and total population. And I got those data points as well, and I'll show you on the side here in these side tabs what I did. But we can see over Pennsylvania as a whole in 2020, the yearly change away from the Democratic Party was 13,980, and the yearly change away from the Republican Party was 9,662. So let me just go to the next slide, or not next slide, but next panel here. I work with PowerPoint too much, you can tell. So this one is the change from party compared to total population by population count. So I went to a open data source, just worldpopulationreview.com, and I got the total population per county in Pennsylvania. So what I did then was I showed most populous counties at the top of both of these sides here, and then I showed what counties had the like what they're not like specifically the high or like the top counties that had people leave that political party, but it's just the top population. And as you can see, Philadelphia, Allegheny, Montgomery, and Bucks, all 4 of those counties, this is an interesting thing in this data set because this is the official data. I need to look and see if there is data that covers this, but inside of this sheet that comes from the pa.gov website, it tells you that it doesn't give you a metric, it doesn't give you a value for how many people left either of these parties in all 4 of those counties, which just so happen to be the top 4 most populous counties. There's also gaps in Lehigh County, Chester County, and if I go down, I don't think there's any more gaps, but all of these smaller counties were able to report, but for some reason the most populous counties are not in this data set. I don't know if that's because they don't report or they're just not included in this data set. But that's what the second tab is trying to get at, to see what the mood was in any specific county. And it's interesting because in the next couple of tabs that I'm going to show you, a lot of the data does actually revolve around, without surprise I think from anyone, around some of these more populous counties. So that's something actually interesting to look at. So what I did with the next section of the data dashboard is I took the change away from the party compared to the total registered voters by county. So what that means is if, let's say, for Republican voters in Lancaster County, they had 8.18% of their party in that county switch away from their that voter affiliation, right? And so you could go through and you can actually see where this was the highest, which is what I have a scope to. So you can see, if I go up here, I'm trying to see if I can find, yeah, so Delaware County is actually interesting. They both had a high, almost, so second highest for Republicans leaving and top highest that we know of for Democrats actually leaving the party inside of that county. And so Delaware County, this is more registered Democratic voters inside Delaware County, and just slightly less by almost 50,000 over here in Delaware County. So these percentages might actually be a similar number, and like we could go up and we could look in one of these other tabs that we were just in to see what those counts actually are. Okay, cool. So now we're getting into where I kind of went outside of the scope of the original project, which is okay because it's kind of an interesting look at this. So I actually got this data from another researcher who had posted this stuff on his GitHub. So he had scraped the election results as of 7 November, and the reason he had to scrape them was because there is no there's no CSV or JSON feed that you can download or publicly have access to from the pa.gov website, and that's as far as I've gotten. I haven't seen that there is one. So he also expressed that as well. So that's where he had to get that. And so it shows all of the vote counts right after the election, just several days, right? And it shows the respective leads. So we had this is a very close race in PA. We're looking at roughly 30,000 votes here, and it shows per county how those were distributed, and yeah, so you can see that there. And then what I did was I took those November 7th results and then I compared them to the 22nd November results. So what we're trying to see here is the difference in gain after the election from the 7th of November to the 22nd of November. So we're just trying to see those two snapshots of time and how much the gain was. So over here we have columns shows these columns, they need to be renamed a little bit because of the data set. I didn't quite get it right. But what this shows is this is the 7th and then this is the 22nd. And you can see the increase. I showed the difference here. So if we take Philadelphia, right? So we had On the 7th, we had 558,000. And then on the 22nd, which was just yesterday for me at this time of making this video, 604,000, right? So this sum right here just shows where the majority of the votes came in between the 7th and the 22nd. So that just shows the total gain there. And when you're actually looking at the dashboard, you can go and you can actually look and see what happened. And it's actually kind of interesting to look down and just see when there's a couple of different negatives that are added in here. And so these are just sort of interesting to observe. And then also what's interesting to observe is McKean County had just null values in place of where there probably should have been something. So that's actually kind of interesting. And that might have been a flaw in my data collection, or it could have been a flaw in I don't know what. But for whatever reason, there's null values for that. And then over here in Beaver County, there's actually a negative difference between the 7th and the 22nd, where almost 900 votes got knocked off. Then over here about minus 30. So these look like pretty minor corrections, but if you go down the table, I guess my point is that you can see that. And then also we have a lot of zeros, a lot of no differences in counties, where this is an interesting data point to see, is it's not every county that actually had an influx of post-election day count. Most of the counties actually didn't have a significant change. They had very minimal change, or actually comparable change. And what's interesting is after election day, if you take some of these counties down here, you'll actually see that in these counties there was actually more Republican vote came in after the fact, in between the 7th and the 2nd, than did for the Democrats. Just the interesting thing because when we're talking about votes that have been counted past election day for whatever reason, mail-in or otherwise, there's a lot of different theories and narratives floating around about that. But when you actually look at the data, it's kind of interesting to see how that works. Now, if I go up to some of the more populated counties, we'll see that it's actually the exact opposite. So it seems like the more populated the county was, actually, or more votes that were cast overall, which is really what this represents. That there were more votes that came in on the Democratic side, almost more, not always a massive amount like in Philadelphia, which is a huge difference. But if you look down some of the smaller counties, there's like 3,000 and 4,000 vote differences. And as you get down outside of Philadelphia and outside of the top populated counties, there's really not that much of a difference when it comes to who actually got those post-election day counts. So that's interesting. Oh, and it's not just post-election day, right? It's November 7th to November 22nd. So that's something to note as well. But we do get into comparing election day against November 22nd, which I felt like was the most relevant one to look at. So what I did was I compared the difference between election day and November 22nd, and I checked each county, and then I checked the gain, right? So we can actually see right here, so like some of these top populated counties, Allegheny, Philadelphia, and Bucks. And it's worth noting that Allegheny County, which I hope I'm saying it right, that's actually Pittsburgh, right? So that's another major city. And I actually didn't know or think of that, and that is just something to note in here whenever you're looking at this data, because a lot of the big changes, they do happen in the more populated areas, and they do happen in those two major cities, Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. So it's just something to observe. So if you go down here, we'll see the change. I want to just highlight the massive difference here. If you go and you look at votes that came in after Election Day in Pennsylvania, the number is like almost 2.1 million. We're getting into, well, if you don't round, no, it's not almost. If you round up, you don't get that, right? But we're looking around 2 million, and we're looking around 650K for Trump. So for Biden, about 2 million after Election Day that were counted, and then over inside of in Trump's campaign, that was almost 650,000. So that's something to take note of, just something interesting there. And then if you look right here, we got these two most populous counties, and we can see some interesting differences in how this all worked out, right? So we've got 350,000 votes came in Philadelphia after Election Day, but only 30,000 came in for Trump right here. So we got Biden over here in blue, and we got Trump in red. That's kind of how I color coded the whole thing, just blue-red, because it just made more sense for visualization than like green and purple, right? So same with Allegheny County, same with Bucks County. But then what's interesting is when we go down a little bit, we see Montgomery County had a pretty large gain there, as did Delaware County and some of the more populous ones that we've looked at before. But as we go down, we'll see that there is almost always a balance in where there were more Democratic votes being counted after Election Day, right? But as we get down in population, it does get more balanced. Not always, but it does get more balanced than what we're looking at over here in the major cities. So that's just an interesting thing, something that you can look at yourself, and you can just check that out. But like right here in Lycoming County, we're looking at 5,300 versus 8,000, right? 7,600 versus 9,700, right? Just these slight gains, right? Whereas we're comparing over here, we're talking about almost triple, quadruple, if not 10 times the amount of votes this difference over there. It's just something to note. Like right here in Venango County, it's almost the same, right? So definitely something to look at right here. Pretty interesting. Let's move on to the next one, though. So this is probably the best visualization that I think I've made thus far. And this actually covers a pretty interesting point. So this shows a picture of the top 10 counties in Pennsylvania and how they were leaning on November 3rd. And then we see post-election, all the way almost, getting toward a month post-election on November 22nd, what they look like on that day. So if I take election day count, I take total count, which is November 22nd. So I can look here and I can see that on election day, the reported votes, we got red and blue here. So it's really easy to see. We have a Trump lead in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 out of 10 counties, with Philadelphia leading pretty significantly for Biden over here, about 151,000 votes up. And what's nice is if you go actually look at this link, and this will be in the description, you can actually go and you can interact with this just the way that I am, and you can see how everything's working. But see, we got 9 out of 10 over here, and then now in hindsight, it looks like we have actually only 1, 2, 3. So 3 out of 10 as opposed to 9 out of 10 for Trump. So almost every single county ended up in the top 10, ended up flipping for Biden after the election. So it's worthwhile to look at the counts and how much of an increase or how tight those were. It's just interesting data to observe. As we can see in Philadelphia, post-election, Trump barely got anything. He got 31,000 post-election votes. And, and then there's like, almost 400K over here getting stacked in Philadelphia. So and then the same for Allegheny County. It's almost 300K, 200K. And you can just compare the differences to see where things occurred, right? So when we're talking about this, we want to talk intelligently. We want to observe what data is here. And this is just something that I'm hoping could be just like a good educational resource. And it's all this data, if you want to go and you want to grab the data yourself and you want to visualize it yourself, all of the links are here for you. And I also took a different visualization approach to this. I did a pie chart of all the counties. And so this was actually one of my favorite visualizations here. It was actually super interesting to see how things went by county, because when you're looking by counties, right, and you're checking out total land mass, right, a lot of people have had discussions about why you look at a state and it looks, you know, like the majority of it is one color, but then little pockets of it are another color, or vice versa, right? And you wonder what happened there. And that's obviously because there's population density and all these other factors come into play. But if we look at election day distribution of vote by county, we actually see this kind of interesting thing happen. So for Trump, we have the majority of his vote, 57%, is in just all of the counties in Pennsylvania, and we have this pretty even distribution throughout every single county out there. And so you can kind of hover it over. Like Philadelphia only makes up 3.7% of his vote on election day. Just something to observe. Whereas these larger chunks on the Biden camp, you can see that they really go toward the more populated areas. So we got Allegheny, Montgomery, Delaware, Philadelphia, right? So if I switch over to November 22nd, like, do I see any difference? It's about the same, right? There's actually 1% split off of the 57 over here. But overall, we can see the distribution still about the same. And you can actually switch through these counties and see what each of them are here with the little slider here. But yeah, that's interesting visualization. Definitely something to look at and play around with. Just an interesting visualization of the data there for you guys to check out. So anyhow, check the link in the description if you want to see this dashboard for yourself. And thanks so much for hanging out with me.